Hello, and welcome to the Gauntlet Podcast. Each month, we look back at games that have been played by Gauntlet folks. My name is Lowell. I use he, him pronouns. And today, I'm joined by my co-host, Shane. Shane, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks, Lowell. I want to start today by acknowledging that I am recording this podcast from the lands of the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nations, and that sovereignty was never ceded. And what else? I use she and her pronouns, and I'm excited to talk about some games today.
Awesome. And today we are joined by Ben Bisogno. Ben is the designer of a game we've talked about a number of times on the podcast, Ma Nishitama, and also has done some designs for The Between. And we have a great post by Ben on the Gauntlet blog about designing the Between threats. Thank you for coming on and joining us today.
That's a very generous introduction, Lowell. Hello, everyone. My name is Ben. Sometimes, like my sister, you can call me Boo. And I go by he, him pronouns. And I had a really great breakfast today. So thanks for having me on.
We are, I should point out, we're coordinating between the United States, Indiana, Melbourne, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Japan. So this is a time loop thing here. They're on a whole nother day than I am. So there we go.
We live in the future, Shane.
It's true.
So for our first segment, each of us gets to go over the RPGs that we played in January and February. And we're going to talk in depth about one game that we played on the Gauntlet calendar. So Shane, how was your gaming in January, February?
Yeah, pretty great, really. Off the Gauntlet, I played a little bit of Masks and a whole lot of The Between. And on the Gauntlet, I continued to run my Fate of the Fairy Queen quarterly, which you're playing in, Lol. Yeah. I feel like we really started to hit our stride in February with the mechanics and the story, everything really coming together. That's been really fun. I played Bluebeard's Bride, which I'm going to talk about a bit more in just a minute. Lovecraft-esque, Quietus, Hot Gay Bro Dragons, a fantastic game by Taylor Lebrecht that really delivers the experience that you want from a game called Hot Gay Bro Dragons.
That's great.
For the Gauntlet's podcasting weekend, I gave the first run to the tentatively titled On the Day of Your Daughter's Wedding. May well have a different title by the time anyone ever hears of it again. And I also played Good Society for the first time. I can't believe it's taken me so long to get to that, given my love of both Jane Austen and role-playing games. I was very tempted to make that the game I talk about today, but there have been quite a few people talking about it on the show before. Darrow and Leandro have both given it a good discussion, and there's been many people making it their favourite of the year in the end of year special. So the only thing I want to add in terms of Good Society is just still trying to work out, will I just add the epistolary phase and the monologue token to every other game that I run from now on? Because they're so good.
So want to play that. It's on my wish list.
Cool. So, like I said, the game that I'm going to discuss in more detail is Bluebeard's Bride. It's a powered by the apocalypse game of feminine horror by Whitney Strix Beltran, Marissa Kelly, and Sarah Doom. It's based on the Bluebeard fairy tale that people may know about a young bride who moves in with her wealthy husband, who gives her the run of the estate. She can go anywhere she wants except for one room. And of course, at the end of the fairy tale, she cracks and she opens that door and finds, there's different variations on the story, but basically the heads of his previous wives, and things start to go badly from there. In this game, each player takes on the role of one aspect of the psyche of that young bride, or the shared character who's the young bride, whose husband has left her in his vast estate. And the players take turns to control that shared character as they explore individual rooms in the estate. As they go, they discover signs that they can, or that they can't, trust their husband. This being a horror game, they certainly cannot trust him, and it all ends badly for them, but with quite different awful endings depending on the choices the players have made along the way. What worked for me about this game? Everything in the game is so tightly focused on delivering the experience that the game and the designer wants you to have in terms of its genre and its themes. I love a lot of games that are really kind of like loose and sprawling, so I don't think that sort of tight focus is always a virtue. You don't need that to have a good game. But there is something really powerful about that sort of precision and elegance. Just things like the names of the moves, which in some ways are similar to the moves you would get in other PBTA games, but caress a horror or dirty yourself with violence. Like the difference between dirty yourself with violence and, like kick some ass or lash out physically in other games, it's immediately striking, along with the choices that they give the players. There's never anything generic about them. Everything about the moves and the game really immerses you in this world of strongly gendered fairy tale horror. In terms of its themes, this is one of the heaviest games I know, and it can encompass things like intimate partner violence and disordered eating. There's a very strong theme around abuse that is unavoidable, I guess, if you're going to play this game. Those would all ordinarily be Lines or X-card territory for me. One thing I really appreciated was how well it bakes in consent and safety tools in the mechanics themselves, in a way that really lets us push harder into themes, which maybe you would normally not want at the gaming table. The game wants us to be uncomfortable, and discomfort is really at the heart of what makes the game so powerful and so effective, but it still takes really meticulous care of us as players. I don't want this to sound like I'm just praising this as a kind of art object or conceptual experience. They're also just really brilliant game mechanics, and it's fun to play. The moves absolutely rule. It's exciting to roll them. The way that the spotlight moves around is fantastic. And I also want to highlight how well the game supports the GM to improvise game material. The way the game is structured is that when you're ready to move to a new room, the GM asks one of the players to describe the key that they're going to use to open a door. And they can describe these very evocative keys with strange structures and materials. And the GM is to improvise a room based on the input that they get from that key and from some of the setup questions from the start of the game. I found that a little intimidating, and sometimes games that require that level of improvisation from me are a bit more than I'm really ready for. But in play, the support the game gave me really made it just fantastically easy. The combination of what, again, are really powerful and thematic GM moves. There are specific types of room moves that are broken down by theme and sub-theme, and also the prompts that emerge as the players use their moves. It just made it really strikingly easy to make these gruesome and very powerful scenes and images emerge from the play. What I'm less sure about, one of the players reflected afterwards that he'd expected more of a kind of feminist horror game where you're fighting back against the horrors of the patriarchy. Not necessarily winning, but fighting back. And maybe the game can be that, but it's also very centrally about complicity. On a narrative level, about women's complicity with patriarchal violence, especially as it intersects with class and other forms of oppression. But another form of complicity that I think the game and its authors are very aware of is that, not quite on a narrative level, but a lot of the player base for role-playing games obviously is men. It can be a male-dominated hobby. A lot of the people playing this game are therefore going to be men. And when I said before the game is intentionally uncomfortable, that discomfort is at least partly about encouraging the men playing the game to reflect on their own complicity in patriarchal violence and abuse, which is, again, one of the things that I think is really powerful about it. And the mechanical precision that I've talked about, is very much in service of that. So reflecting on that, and I also heard from another player who was not in the game that she'd read my event description and thought it sounded like this sort of light fairy tale cozy game, which is the furthest thing possible from the actual experience. So what I'm really less sure about is how I personally will try and present this game to players to make sure they really understand what it's about or what they're getting into. Because that really is my takeaway as well. Before playing this game, you should think about the subject matter that it involves. It's clearly not for everyone or for every group, but it really is a fantastic game. And if you think that you could play it safely, I really highly recommend it.
Now, did you run or play?
This is my first time running it. I've played it once before. Yeah.
Okay. Ben, anything you want to ask before we move on?
All right. So I love Bluebeard's Bride. I'm watching an ongoing actual play on YouTube, and it's all animated. Like someone actually animated all of the characters like in 2D, which really brings out a different aspect of the experience, how cinematic it is, actually, which I wouldn't expect because it's such a psychological game. And one of my favorite aspects of the game is the move Shiver from Fear. Did that come up in your game, Shane? And to be clear, like Shiver from Fear is when a character themselves reacts physically or shows signs that they're experiencing the game really immediately. So the groundskeeper like calls on the player. It's like, What are you afraid will happen? Which is similar in a certain way to the Between, but it brings out the physical aspect of play because it's when a player reacts to the narrative.
Yeah, it came up for the first time in the game in the most perfect way that I could have asked for. Because like you say, it's about the player themselves physically reacting in fear. And that can be hard to pick up, I think, in an online game where you're over video chat as opposed to around a table where it might be more obvious. But the first time it came up in the game was when one of the players said verbally, "Oh, I just shivered in my seat." And I said, "Oh, well, you've triggered shiver from fear." And he had no idea.
That's great.
He was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the mechanics."
That's wonderful.
But yeah, it's really fantastic.
Awesome. Let's move on. Ben, why don't you tell us about how your January, February went?
Thank you. I played a lot, but not that much on the Gauntlet, although I wish I did. Although I played a lot of pickup games on the Gauntlet Discord, which I'm not sure counts as the Gauntlet or not.
It's fine. It's fine.
I'm going to start with what I'm going to talk about. I played Pictures in an Exhibition at a international LARP festival. I played Wander Home with my mom.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a 2-person game. It's really fun. By Jade Dragon. I played a Magical Regulators kind of playtest hack of the Between, which is based on Terry Pratchett, and it was wonderful. We played a Melt Me, and I'm creating a youth LARP called Hero Academy here in Kansai. So we playtested that. We played Trophy Dark with my Osaka group, and Manishtana, and Reunion with Death, which was the Secrets and Powers LARP in a very traditional American style. And we played the Victor's Tale, which my cousin Gabrielle made. It's a short zine. And I played a Bopper LARP,
Wow.
which was such a wonderful experience to be in person fighting with, you'd say play toys, but just foam swords. It was amazing and so refreshing. And I played on the Gauntlet. I finished up a game, an 8-part series of The Between, which consisted only of contest threats, and it was fabulous. And we had an extraterrestrial mastermind, Jasa, the High Period of Venus, by Matthew on the Gauntlet, and we played Shane's Kensington Killer and David Morrison's Mean Times in Greenwich. It was a blast.
Awesome. So what do you want to talk about today?
Okay, so I'm a big stan for LARPs. And that's how I kind of identify, as a LARP artist. LARPs can range from super goofy to, for example, really intense, highly aesthetic experiences. And the LARP I'm talking about today, Pictures in an Exhibition, kind of edges on the side of high art, if you would call it that. It's a LARP by Halden Ingwersen and Miles Lysak. And you can find the game on recreationalcannibalism.itch.io. What a
We'll have the link
page.
in the show notes.
It's like Night at the Museum, but with just visual and installation art, which can get pretty wild if you know anything about installation art. In the fiction, at 11 p.m. sharp, some of the artworks wake up and can talk. And this is a LARP that's designed for a Zoom format. So everyone is in their little picture frame of the computer, and they become a piece of art. It is made up of 3-act structure. Each player finds out what playbooks they are playing, and these are called archetypes in the game and provide inspirational touchstones for how to steer play. So, for example, I may be playing a Glichet, right? Or I may be playing a Picasso or the Mona Lisa, and I might be playing the playbook, the archetype of the caregiver who is concerned with context, how other people depend on them. So one emotional conflict that a caregiver archetype may confront during the LARP is feeling pride in how other other characters rely on your support and empathy, but at the same time being an easy target for exploitation. So tied into this theme, each playbook has a desire and a question to help guide their play throughout the experience. So the desire for the caregiver, for example, is to protect and help others, and that will help drive how you play the character. And there's certain questions that are core to the character. Where would they be without you? Where would you be without them? These are really key components of what the caregiver archetype is inspired by. and helps you figure out the game. There are two forms of complications that may come up in play. One is one you choose yourself, and one is something that we choose as a group depending on what type of exhibition we choose to play in. For example, an individual conflict that a masterpiece, as the game calls you, can choose is you are considered especially notable, but it's because of an imperfection in your creator's technique. And so this is an emotional conflict that I use that term inspired by Thirsty Sword Lesbians, which informs all of my gaming experiences for now and forever.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the gallery setting of this potential, it's like a playset. In the gallery setting, the art is part of a private collection that is ransacked by thieves by the end. In Act 3 of the museum setting, there is a natural disaster that the art can only overhear and can't see directly. And at the end, the text says, "The people who see you have changed. How they see you has changed." And throughout the entire experience, this change in our circumstances is foreshadowed. And at the end of the game, we end by narrating our individual epilogues. So it's a really great experience. In the game that we played, every 40 or so minutes, there was a new act and our circumstances altered, foreshadowing this inevitable change. In the real game, as the GM described, each act is actually about 2 hours, and the game can last 6 hours.
Wow.
Being a piece of art in front of a camera, which I cannot imagine. And I can't imagine it because it's a game where people talk, but there's not a lot of plot. It's not the central feature of it.
Mm-hmm.
It is a long meditation about our conversations and our reactions to one another. It reminds me of the in-person LARP Still Life by Wendy Gorman and David Hertz and Heather Silsby because of its chill and patient vibe. And in Still Life, you play rocks who react to the changing forces of nature. And so people kind of push you around, literally, as you change positions as a rock. So this reminded me of that. So what worked for me? There's lots of possibilities to discuss philosophy and life. There was a minimal structure and a perfection of concept. And the group that we played with, it was at an international LARP festival run by an Italian LARP company, Chaos League. And, in their aesthetic, it's called the Southern Way. LARP should be played unsafe. And what they mean by that is to be played daringly and to play with high art and not just safe in the usual themes that we play with LARP. LARP should use and become hybridized with all types of art, whether it's audible or physical or painting. And there should always be co-authorship and a mutual trust among players. And the play should be art, but importantly, should be about play. I think it's a really interesting and provocative play aesthetic. And for the game that we played in, it really helped us get into the vibe. So relationships in the game were really central, and there was less focus on mechanical aspects of play. For example, in the between, the keeper will be calling out moves as they come up in the narrative. Oh, that sounds like the information move. In Bluebeard's Bride, oh, that sounds like Shiver from Fear. But in this game, you're just waiting for an hour or more for the GM to say, okay, and you go to sleep, right? And we arrive at the next day. And so it's during this duration, this largesse, this expanse of time that we really embody the characters that we were playing, that we are masterpieces upon the wall. Or as one of the players played a live installation piece made up of rat tails. So one of the things that it really reminded me of was a perspective by Morton Feldman.
There's a deep cut. Wow.
So in his pieces, he's a composer in the 20th century. He distinguished between the words form and scale in art. He said that up to an hour in length, the ear wants to hear form in a piece of music. And after an hour, it hears scale. And Feldman said, and I'm going to quote here, and I'm reading from a page. Feldman said, "A sensation can emerge that we are not looking at a painting," and he's talking about Rothko's kind of matte pieces of art, that we are not looking at the painting, but the painting is looking at us, end quote. In a similar way, I felt like I was playing the game less than the game was playing with me. I usually only get this experience during multi-day LARPs or multi-session TTRPGs, this experience of expanse. And that's what this game really provided. What I'm less sure about is that it was so long that, there's 30 pages of material, but there's not much to do. There was a sense of futility almost at times, because when thieves broke into the art gallery, we could do nothing about it, and we could only react and talk with one another. This was a short 3-hour experience, but it could be 6 hours, and I think I would really need to change how I was thinking about the game.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I'm less sure about. The takeaway is that I would love to play more games on the Gauntlet. Garrick Reininghaus is my idol. He plays online LARPs a lot, and I want to mimic him, right? I want to play LARPs on the Gauntlet because there's so many great ones coming out every day. And by every day, probably every week, someone's made a new online LARP, right? And they can have the same firepower as in-person LARPs and provide new perspectives on how we can make tabletop role-playing games. So that's what I played. Pictures in exhibition.
So you've involved with the kind of the LARP scene. Would you say that there has been, in the last 2 years, because of the change, has there been like a real development of online functioning LARPs rather than like in person?
Yeah, there's been a renaissance, I'd say. There's like a steady stream of LARPs made for the online format since the advent of Skype, right? There was always telephone LARPs. However, since the beginning of the pandemic, a lot more focus by a lot more players has been brought to the scene, and a lot of creative thought has been going into it that I think is really welcome. Especially with the Golden Cobra challenge, limiting entries to only LARPs that are designed for online format or play that is not in person has really encouraged a lot of people to think about the medium.
Cool. Shane, is there anything you want to say before I move on?
It's just, I just feel like my mind has been blown. I had no idea that something like this existed. I really love kind of like slow cinema stuff, like some Bellatar, some Lav Diaz, and the thought of pretending to be a painting for 6 hours just sounds so nice to me. I really want to try. I really want to try this out.
Awesome.
I was like a cubist painting. I was holding my koto, and my inner conflict was that my head was not in the painting. It was just my body. And so I stood on my desk for the whole 3 hours like this. And
that's wild.
I was in love with an audience member who couldn't love me back, and it was just really heart-wrenching.
Amazing.
Awesome. So my January, February was pretty good. Off Gauntlet played our 13th Age. It's our face-to-face game where we're actually meeting face-to-face, which is still scary. We're playing a game of Mage PBTA. That's a hack that someone had did. We played Hearts of Wulin, and on Sunday mornings I'm playing Legacy Life Among the Ruins. First time I've gotten to play it rather than run it, which is a real experience. On the Gauntlet, I did a game of Hearts of Wulin with a Star Wars frame that we ended up not getting to the third session. I've always felt very bad about that. I also played Hearts of Wulin Numberless Secrets, which is a Brindlewood Bay mystery wuxia game. I did some sessions of Dungeons & Dragons 5e Ravnica on Roll20, which was another game that had, I would say, January, February was hard, and people's schedules just did not line up. But also did Godbound Fate of the Fairy Queen with you, Shane. I've been doing Delta Green Gumshoe and a quarterly, which I'll eventually talk about. And I did a playtest game of Nexus Modern Sorcery. And then I also did the game I want to talk about, which is Monster Care Squad. So Monster Care Squad is a game from Sandy Pug Games, and there's a nice large team of folks who have worked on it. It's a PBTA game that is set in the fantasy world of Aldamura, where the various peoples live in harmony and often in symbiosis with monsters. Now, we use the term monsters in the game, but it's just great beasts of various supernatural forms and things like that. The game very much sets it up that there's no fighting, that violence is never a solution. That just doesn't exist as a solution. There's not conflict. But what is happening in this world is there's this new mysterious illness called the false gold, which is affecting the different monsters in different ways with different symptoms like weeping gold or crystals coming out of them. There are all kinds of ways. And it's begun to strike these monsters. And those symptoms have driven the monsters to panic. Sometimes they are hurting other people. Sometimes they're destroying resources and things. And the team, the players, play monster care specialists who are sent out to deal with these infection incidents. So it's not a pastoral game, but it is a game that changes kind of what the terms of conflict and interaction are. So let me talk about what I really liked. The game is broken into very discrete phases. That's very structured. There is a phase for diagnosis, where you spend time, and the basic moves are specifically for figuring out what's wrong, what the symptoms are. There's a phase for synthesis, where you put together the solution, like the things you're going to use to fix the problem. And then there's symbiosis, which is going and applying those cures to the monster and trying to have a more action-oriented thing. The basic moves differ in each of the three phases. There's no other basic moves. Each phase has a set of basic moves. And then each of the playbook moves is tied, usually particularly to a particular phase. So I really like that. I like that kind of structured play. I also really love the setting. I love the world. It's a beautifully illustrated book. The setting is very cool. There's all this wonderful backstory about how the monsters advise and the Council of Monsters and the sort of celestial hierarchy. It's great. Like, it's fun. It's a delight to read. I'll say that. Another thing I love when games have evocative GM moves, like not just the basic moves, but they have evocative GM moves. And one of the GM moves in this game is the weather changes. And I love that. I love that metaphorically. I love that literally. I think that's a great GM reaction to a fail. I used it a couple of times. It's dynamite. It's one I want to steal. And there are a couple of other GM moves like that have a real sense of not being hard, like not being painful, like smackdown, but causing complications. The characters have stats like classic PBTA, but one of the nice things is you also, for each of the stats, you can associate a training or a background. Like one person had confectioner as a background, and another person had like fisher person, and another person took as kind of background like chronic pain. These are things that if you can bring them to bear, you can get a bonus, but you can also use them as what they call an ace, which is spending it and you get an extra D4 to roll, and you can add that to your roll. And that's actually a currency that goes throughout the game, is these aces that you pick up, session aces or scene aces, and so on. I also like that for advancement, when you advance after you solve a problem, you can take new moves, but you can also have the monsters enhance one of your playbook moves. And so each playbook move has like an advanced version of it from the Blessing of Monster. I think that's very cool. It ties into play very nicely. The last thing I'll mention of stuff I really dug is when we do get to that cure phase, that symbiosis phase, the way this works is there's a track, and there's a player track and a monster track, and they're one on top of each other, and they're marked as D4, D6, D8, D10, and D12. And the player is pushing up on their track, and the monster is pushing down. And where they kind of meet, there's some tension. You're doing these actions to kind of move that gauge along. At a certain point, you kind of go, okay, we're stuck here. We're going to roll the final move with just a D6 or just a D8 or a D10. You can spend your aces to boost that. So there's about spending resources and doing it. It's a really interesting way to do a kind of extended conflict in PBTA that I haven't seen before. I like that. I think it's tech that's worth stealing for other games. That being said, and again, I there's so much I love about this game, but I had some issues with it. Things that I was really uncertain about. And this is a conversation that I had with the players afterwards, and we kind of talked through it at the very end. The first two phases of play are about interactions and about finding things out. So we've got the diagnosis and the synthesis. But there's not a lot of examples in the book of like what kinds of things you can find out. Like, what does that look like? Like, what are you discovering? I'd like a little more support for that. As well, the players felt like the middle phase of synthesis was kind of just more of the same. It was different moves and you were doing different things, but a lot of it was kind of just running over the same territory that they had done with the first phase. And some of the assumptions and decisions that they'd made in the first phase were kind of hard to then work out for the second phase. Like they were decided that they needed to get the monster into water to do this. Well, then the moves that are there weren't great for like, how do you set that up? How do you prepare for that? The players had some issues with that. And I think that there's something to be said there. It's a problem, especially because there are a lot of gaps in the moves. The moves are written very tightly in some ways, so that there are places where like, okay, I want to do this, but I'm not sure how it fits. And usually in PBTA, if there's uncertainty, you can either hand wave it or you can modify one of the existing moves to make it work. And in many cases, it felt too important to just hand wave, but then getting that move to work took a lot of tweaking the move, like really changing how the text worked or what the trigger worked or what came out of it. So that was hard in a lot of the phases. Related to that, especially when you have that issue where you're not sure what moves work and you're trying to come up with new things and you're having to tweak it, in that curing phase, which is the most action-oriented phase, like it's you're doing physical things, you're trying to get on the monster, you're trying to apply the cure. It's very cool, cinematic and stuff. But monsters have 3 symptoms. So each track isn't for the whole thing, it's for each symptom. So you cure one symptom, make the roll to cure it, and then you start again. And the players found that, like when we hit that third one, they were like, okay, I think we've already hit all that we need to. There are also some mechanical things with it about how, while the symptom is active, what it's doing, like there's some negative effects it's applying that are really, really harsh, eating up the player's resources. And so I'm less certain about that. So those are kind of mechanical things. I think that some tweaks on that, some working on that, playing it again, I could see how it could make it stronger. The last thing I'll say is this, and this is a design thing, but order of information presentation in the text is really important. When you're writing a book, you need to be thinking about how the players are approaching it. And there are several cases where key information isn't marked out, and I had to go back and find it. You don't have individual moves for playbooks, but there's a big list of playbook moves, and you choose from them. They're not alphabetical. So if you've taken a move and then you need to go back and look at it, or the GM needs to check it, you have to scan all the pages, and it's like 7 or 8 pages of these playbook moves. And that's a bad decision. The other thing is, when you are presenting moves, you need to kind of start from the general, like the most common use, the most basic, the most broad, and then kind of work to the specific. And that's not the way the moves are presented for each segment here. It's a small thing. But, for example, on the curing thing, the first one is about climbing on the monster, to kind of get in position. And then the next one is when you fail, when you retreat, you go do this. And then there's some more curing moves. Like, the fail needs to go at the end. You need to show me what are the things that we can do. We really need to think about the order of presentation for especially the basic moves on the reference sheets and in the book, and think about what people are going to be needing to look at the most often and kind of work in a hierarchy there. So that was something I had a small issue with. And it's more of an issue of me as a reader than it is in play. My takeaway, I really, really like this game in so many ways. I think it's a brilliant concept. I think it's beautifully done. But I think that if I were going to run it again, I'd have to tweak it. It feels like there's some sections that need more development, more refinement, another pass on. And again, I say that with love. Like I would go and do the work because I think this game has such promise. And if you're at all interested in the concept, I would recommend picking up the PDF at the very least. You should go and check it out. Any comments, questions on that?
Well, yeah, I'm excited that you played that game. That was really good to hear. I backed the Kickstarter, and I am excited to play this one day. And I love it when you play a game before I do, because I know you're going to have such useful feedback about what I might want to change when it's my turn around.
Mm-hmm. Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. Ben, did you want to say something before I move on?
I loved the art on the Kickstarter. And it's I love how evocative the concept is. And I from how you describe it, I have not yet played. Someone please invite me to a session. It sounds like everything that Pokemon, is promised to be, except Pokemon goes into like the kind of, it veers into fighting. This game actively is about the cultivation of our connection with the creatures around us. Yeah. Like our relationships, our friendships, and using that help us not only treat the beasts, the great beasts, but like really grow as individuals. And like that's something I really loved, or I loved as a kid playing Pokemon Sapphire, and that I would love engaging in this game in a very different setting, but in a similar emotional landscape.
I will say, so for me, in my head, it was like reverse Monster Hunter world. Like that's how I had it. I hadn't, until you said that, made the connection to Pokemon. And that actually like changes how I see the monsters. I love that. I think you could frame it in either direction. That's great.
Hi listeners, I wanted to let you know that new issues of Codex are now available in the Gauntlet Patreon feed. Codex is the Gauntlet's bi-monthly role-playing game magazine. Each issue is organized around a theme and stuffed with brand new material for your table, including original games and supplemental material for games like Trophy and Brindlewood Bay. Check out Codex by going to patreon.com/gauntlet. Your pledge not only gets you Codex and other Gauntlet publications, but it also supports all the important work we do in the Gauntlet, including this very podcast. If you'd like to try before you buy, there's always a free issue of Codex available on our website, gauntlet-rpg.com. And if you're looking for back issues, you can find them on DriveThruRPG, including in reduced price bundles. Thanks.
So listeners, in our second segment, Ben is going to talk about a topic, a project, something of their choice. So Ben, what did you want to talk about today?
I want to talk about the trials and triumphs of designing with, for, and inspired by family. You see, my cousin Gabrielle and I have been creating a game called Manishtana, Why Is This Night Different, for the last 2 years. And it's a game modeled on how we celebrate the Passover Seder in our family, and specifically at her dinner table in New Jersey. And so the production process, it kind of reminds me of how Terry Colleen and Ross Cowman created the Heart of the Unicorns BFF, Best Friends Forever game, because it's a mother and son team. It's super honobono. I think that a game is always enriched when the relationship of the creators is reflected in the game, right? It's like how a game is created is as impactful, I think, as, say, art. If our relationship is as friends, this game it's going to feel more like you are engaging in some sort of friendship, even if it's like the between, right? There is a connection between the hunters in this dark house. Whereas in this game, in Manishtana, we are family members making a game about a family. In the story of Exodus, all of the characters are related somehow, whether it is the Pharaoh and the Pharaoh's daughter who adopts a Hebrew child, right? And then this Hebrew child has sisters and brothers, and they're saving their entire culture. This is a game about the connections that we form between us and how that is like the foundation upon miracles are built. It's human connection and faith in each other and the world around us, that things will end up all right. And so Gabrielle and I started riffing on the Exodus story during Passover a few years ago, and the fun and joy that we experienced created a spark that would become Manishtana. This game is about breathing life into a story about the fight for freedom from oppression. It's an opportunity to inhabit an ancient tale that feels immediately relevant in so many contexts, even especially in Ukraine. Given our history, I believe the Jewish community has a responsibility to advocate for those who are experiencing violent displacement. Manishtana is a story that helps us think about those themes and step into those characters' shoes. There's a lot of risks. So there's a lot of triumphs when creating games with family, and there's a lot of potential trials. We could have alienated each other. The game design actually has been an effort of love, but at the same time, vulnerability. I feel that if I were in New York with Gabrielle, she would have thrown me from her apartment window at this point. Like, distance sure can be a blessing. Thank you, the Rona. And and the reason I say that is because I am a real space cadet. I live on the moon, and I lose track of time, and that's one reason it has been taking 2 years, and why the Kickstarter we're going to be putting on next month, I feel, is a little premature, but it's going to be Passover, so we're just kind of, let's go and push it as hard as we can, so that
Absolutely.
people can put this on their table if they want to. So what was really cool for me is that the collaboration was an effort of patience and the satisfaction when we seized the moments we could really make things happen as a team. Gabrielle works at a museum and I'm a student, and so sometimes it was hard to connect, but when we did, it was so enriching, and I feel like we were stronger as cousins together. We balance each other's strengths and weaknesses. She is a brilliant and great designer and wordsmith, and I am a pretty boy, right? And Gabrielle, said to say this on the podcast, like, Ben is an unstoppable force of energy and creativity, but that is just because I sleep probably 9 hours a day. So Manishtana has brought us together throughout the pandemic and across the physically similar spaces of Brooklyn and Kyoto. So Manishtana is a ritual storytelling game that you might have heard about on the podcast, with no dice and no GMs. We pass the storytelling hat in each scene from player to player, and in that way share the responsibility of facilitating. And this facilitator role is called the ritual guide. It's been developed for both remote and in-person play, and we can't wait to play it together in person one day soon. One core mechanic of the game that I'm really psyched about is what we call the wait mechanic, which is based on how our family acts at the table, where everyone wants to pull the spotlight onto themselves and renegotiate the truth at whatever is at hand. And it works much like an X card would, but it's more of a proactive kind of way. Like, I think, wait, this is treading into some difficult territory, or wait, I have this crazy idea. It's a way of generating how we speak at the Passover Seder, like in real life. And I think it really works, at least in this game. So we found that shy and quiet players find it very useful as a safety mechanic and as just a general story brush from which we can make a more evocative story. Because we don't just follow the executive narrative exactly. We emulate the narrative beats, the confrontation with a powerful overlord, right? Breaking away from the place we were from and confronting an obstacle. The famous parting of the seas. The obstacle may not be a sea in your case. It could be a desert. It could be a metaphorical obstacle. And it's in discovering those moments throughout play that we make the story our own and really connects us with the themes of the narrative. So we will be kickstarting Manashtana in April of this year, and an ashcan will be available for those who want to play it at their Seder table. We have a newsletter, and you're welcome to sign up, and hopefully in the show notes it will pop up. So if you're interested, let us know.
I just want to say again, I've said this on the show before, but this is such a great game. You've done such amazing work. I have only played it as when I got to jump in as the second half of a two-parter that was already in progress, which is not the ideal circumstances to learn a new game, but it was so good and so powerful, so moving and funny. Like, it really was an amazing experience, and I am super excited for the final version of the game.
I do think it ties into RPGs so well because these stories are from the three traditions that are the people of the book. But these things live through oral communication and conversation and stuff, and they get transformed. Not to be too sacrilegious, but there is a parallel with we have a text of the rules that we have with an RPG, and then our conversation, our interaction with it makes it live for us. And it's only in that context that it really allows us to live it. I think it's a great game. I think it's dynamite.
I think that the connection that you see, Lowell, between how we play RPGs today and between the mystical traditions is actually very close. Even the dice that we use, right? This D6 or an oracle, for example, an oracle mechanic where you pull a card and that brings up a prompt. These things are present in mystical traditions for a reason. They connect us with chance, with spontaneity, with like potential worlds that we can't see right in front of us. And that's where we create meaning together. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. And listeners, we will have links to that in the show notes for the newsletter, and we'll update it when the Kickstarter starts. So listeners, in our last segment, we are each going to discuss something that has been lately inspiring us or providing us joy. So Shane, what is giving you life?
People who know me might laugh at this, but I'm going to say that the natural world is giving me life. I am a very inner city sort of person. I do not like to leave like for a lot of the last couple of years, Melbourne people could not move more than 10 kilometers from their home. I did not understand why you would ever want to do that, because all the good coffee is within 10 kilometers of my home already. Like, where would I go? But every, 5 years or so, I like to stretch my legs and get out and see some trees, some things like that. So last weekend, I went out to the Dandenongs, which is some beautiful old growth forest just on the outskirts of Melbourne, with my partner Aki, who is the real person who gives me life this and every month. And it was just so nice. I am going to try and make the transition to a more frequent schedule of touching trees, seeing nature. But yeah, that's definitely what's been giving me life for the last little while.
Awesome. Ben, what is giving you life?
I want to shout out the chicken named Floppy, who lives up to her name. She's always flopping around, who just stopped brooding after seemingly 2 months. Where every day my dad would have to go out and physically move the chicken to drink water, right? And to eat food, and then bring it back to her little nest. And I say this because ever since I left home and came to Japan, my parents have replaced me with a cluck of chickens. And they have been sending me chicken stickers, and a chicken calendar. And it's giving me life. May I show you the calendar?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, viewers, yes. I'm going to describe what we're seeing. So right now there is a chicken with a long kind of what is it called? It's dangling from its throat. It has quite the mean look. Oh yeah,
there's a 1,000-yard stare on that chicken.
It's a 1,000-yard stare, and it's my replacement, right? And I think actually my parents are much happier with chickens than me around, and I think that's a blessing. So thank you, Floppy.
Ironically, I just saw on Gauntlet community member Danielle Abilta's Twitter today, she had pictures of chickens that her family has. So there's a little synchronicity there. So what's giving me life is, I've mentioned Xenoblade before, and I did a post on this, but I went back because they're closing the Wii U store soon. I went back and I pulled out my Wii U, and I'm replaying Xenoblade Chronicles X, which is never going to get a port, but it is the best science fantasy JRPG. It's so good, and you should get it, and you should get it soon, because there's a textures update pack that you can only get through the Wii U store, and after the end of March, it'll be gone. Well, it's just, I was like, I'll just play a little bit of it, and I'm 90 hours in, and I love it. It's a terrible game in many ways, and it's just fiddly enough that I adore it. So that is absolutely what is giving me life right now. I do want to mention, this is something suggested by Ben Shane, and I think this is a really good idea. So podcasts are supposed to be free from the timeline, but as we're recording this, 2 crises have grabbed our attention, and we'd like to ask listeners that you consider making a donation to one or both of these charities. The first is transtexas.org, and we're going to put a link in the show notes to this. They have an emergency relief fund to help those impacted by this horrific new policy in Texas. It may get litigated and overturned, and there will be people who are going to fight against it, but this is a terrible precedent, and it's going to have devastating consequences. It already has for the lives of so many people. It's moving the Overton window, and it's awful. The other organization that we would encourage you to support is Doctors Without Borders. They are working within Ukraine as well as elsewhere, and you can donate to them at doctorswithoutborders.org. There are a number of other charities out there for the situation in Ukraine. That's just one of them, but please consider taking your time investing in that. We wanted to make just a tiny, the most sliver of a statement about that. And that is our show. Thank you so much for playing with us. You can check out the show notes for links about the games we discussed, and you can find out more about the Gauntlet at www.gauntlet-rpg.com, where you can find articles, podcast info, and links to our forums. You can also follow us on Twitter at GauntletRPG. If you're interested in playing with the Gauntlet, check out our calendar site, our forums. We also have a Patreon at patreon.com/Gauntlet. We have a Slack that is, if you play with us at all, play with us one session, you're welcome to come on our Slack, which talks about the games that we do play. Or if you support the Patreon, you're also welcome to join the Slack there. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Shane, for co-hosting with me.
Thank you.
And Ben, thank you for coming on and doing this with us.
It was such a pleasure. Thank you so much. And I look forward to playing with you two again in the near future.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Listeners, and that is our show.